Hello and welcome to episode number 74 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. And with me today, of course, as always, is my wonderful killer co-host, Gar Borras. Gar, it's great doing these shows with you, and we're continuing our holiday theme of shows. And today we're going to be talking all about a great classic 1966 film starring the legendary Don Knotts. I'm, of course, talking about The Ghost and Mr. Chicken.
Yes, sirree. That movie really brings back a lot of memories.
It really does. And you know, Gar, before we get talking about today's show, I wanted to thank everybody because our last episode, number 73, which was on Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving, I kid you not, it went viral, and within 24 hours of being up, it hit at like 5K views. So we want to thank everybody for making that show such a success. That's why we continue to do this, because you guys continue to tune in. So let's get into today's episode, Gar. I mean, as far as The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, like you said, it has many memories. So what are some of those memories that immediately come to your mind?
Well, when that movie came out, I was 10 years old. And I really didn't know much about music. Mm-hmm. You know, at that time, I was just a kid. Doing what kids do. You know, playing with my G.I. Joes, because G.I. Joe was brand new at that time, too.
Yeah.
It had just came out. But at that time, I remember watching the movie, and when the movie was over, I remember being really taken by the beautiful sound of the pipe organ in the movie.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the church pipe organs from that movie.
Now, Gar, since you brought that up, I have to ask you, interestingly enough, I learned that the guy that did the soundtrack and composed the music for this was none other than Vic Mizzy, who did the music for the classic Addams Family TV show that we also did an episode on in the past. But I bring that up because, interestingly enough, had I not known that and learned that in doing the research, it might have kind of passed me. But right as the movie's ending, there's this little bit where the organ is kind of playing by itself, and if you're not paying attention, you'll almost miss it. It's the music that's playing is almost a nod to the Addams Family theme.
Well, the person that wrote the music, also wrote the music for the Addams Family.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, and had I not known that, I might have missed it. But it's interesting because you can hear elements of the Addams Family theme playing kind of at the end when that piano is playing by itself.
As a kid, it was creepy.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like scary creepy or anything. It was more, I don't know. It's hard to describe.
Well,
how creepy can be, like, really cool because it's not scary.
Well, like what I was reading is when this movie came out, Gar, in 1966, this was what kind of was referred to like a comedy mystery movie, which was a very popular thing back in 1966. Those movies were very popular. So as Hollywood often does, they're like, okay, we're gonna go with the craze, and we're gonna. In fact, I was reading that this movie in particular was based on an Andy Griffith episode where they had a haunted house, and again, Don Knotts seen that this was popular. He got some of the writers from the Andy Griffith TV show, and they came up with kind of an idea. That's kind of what spawned the idea for this film.
Well, Andy Griffith, had a very large hand in this movie.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that he was the guy that came up with Attaboy Luther.
Yeah. I was reading that. Yeah.
So there was a lot of contributions that Andy Griffith had he really did play. There are a lot of connections between The Ghost and Mr. Chicken and the Andy Griffith.
fact,
it's almost like it's a continuation of the Andy Griffith Show, because like all of the actors are I think it's like 15 of the actors that used to be on the Andy Griffith Show were in this movie.
Yeah.
That's a lot of actors.
Yeah, again,
you know what I mean?
yeah. And they played like a lot of extras. And so anyways, again, it says, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken is a 1966 American comedy mystery movie starring TV star Don Knotts, who had just left the Andy Griffith Show, where he played the lovable Barney Fife. Now, again, Gar, what's interesting, and that I did not know at the time until doing the research for today's episode, is he had just left the Andy Griffith, and this is kind of, because of the success of this particular movie, it is what launched his successful movie career. That's the thing people got to realize. Don Knotts had been a TV star at that point in time, and a lot of times people back then, you were either a TV star or a movie star. Typically, you didn't do both. But oddly enough, leaving the Andy Griffith Show, as big of a blow as that was to the Andy Griffith Show, this movie here that we're talking about really kind of catapulted him into Hollywood and launched his movie career.
Well, let's touch on that, because you're 100% right about that. There was a distinct, definite, well-known separation between TV and movies. Movies was considered the big league.
Yeah.
TV actors and actresses were not held in the same regard as movie stars. Movie stars were in the stratosphere, and TV stars were held in high regard.
Sure.
But it was a much lower tier than movie stars, and during that same time, there was a common thing that doesn't exist anymore. It was called typecasting.
Oh, sure.
And it was a curse for any actor. If you get this role that just, it just becomes what everyone knows you as that role.
Yeah.
Once you try to get other acting jobs, you can't get any more work because everybody turns you down because of the typecasting thing that was going on back then. Which nowadays there is no separation. You can be a TV actor and be in movies, and you can be a movie actor, a highly regarded. Nowadays, you could be a highly regarded Oscar-winning actor, and you will see them appearing in commercials. And commercials is the third tier.
Sure.
You know what I mean? For actors, that is the lowest tier for actors. And so, there is no separation between these three tiers anymore. But back in the 60s, there were lines, there were walls.
Yeah, but Gar,
know what I mean?
Yeah, let's take a further look at Don Knotts' career, as a whole, because it's an interesting case study. First of all, to give people kind of an example of what we're talking about, typecasting. Great example of that would be like Henry Winkler. He become thought so much as the Fonz that when that show ended for several years, he could not get other acting parts because they're like, no, we don't want the Fonz on our show. Everybody thinks of you as the Fonz. And so for a while, he had to go into producing and directing, doing other things. And he's been in Hollywood for so long at now this point. Not only has he embraced being the Fonz, and not only is he kind of still thought of as the Fonz, but it's a wonderful thing. He's been able to do other parts like in Waterboy, and he's been able to get other parts because he's had kind of lasting career. Anybody that played in the Munsters from the 1960s also. Fred Gwynne was a great actor, but we don't want Herman Munster in our movie, And so for several years, he couldn't do anything but that. But let's look at Don Knotts, because he's not your typical TV star or movie star. I mean, he's not like a great-looking heartthrob like a Paul Newman or a Robert Redford. But at the same time, he was successful in the movies and on TV because of his comedy, his physical comedy. He made it work for him. And even kind of his lack of good looks, because of his physical comedy, he was able to combine all of that and make it work for him.
Well, the same comedy that he was using in the Andy Griffith Show.
Exactly.
When he was being spooked, it was the same, same whole movements and all of that, his demeanor and everything.
Yeah.
It was the same thing that really catapulted him to stardom on TV. Was the same thing that he was using because it was his secret sauce.
Yeah, I mean,
because back in those days, slapstick comedy, which is physical comedy, that there was a name for it back then called slapstick.
Yeah, that's what this was.
And slapstick comedy was really much more popular back in those days than it is now. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist to the same degree that it used to be back then. Slapstick was very, very popular way back then, and it has actually waned over the years. And you still see it, but it's not as much. Yeah, it's been kind of changed for the times, too.
Yeah, let's look at the history of that, though, Gar. I mean, slapstick comedy goes all the way back to the Three Stooges, Lucille Ball, even on the Andy Griffith Show you mentioned. Even like John Ritter was known for his physical comedy, and that's one of the things he was really known for. And it's interesting that Don Knotts would end up on Three's Company for a couple of reasons, working with a great physical comedian like John Ritter. They had great scenes together. Also, look at the person that Don Knotts replaced on Three's Company. Norman Fell is Mr. Stanley Roper, very much like Don Knotts. You remember that when he was on the show, he would do this thing where he would kind of roll his eyes and he'd look into the camera and give you like a funny looking face. But that's what these guys became known for. It was their physical comedy, their facial expressions.
Yes, it's really, things go in cycles.
Sure.
And I wouldn't be surprised
if it comes back. Yeah.
Slapstick, has a resurgence in popularity. But I don't really mention it, in a negative light, because everything takes its natural course.
Yeah.
But I'm just pointing out that it's a noticeable difference
today.
How times change things.
And Luther,
sometimes people look at that in a negative way, and I'm not meaning it in a negative way.
Oh no, and if we're honest, Gar, here, like Luther Higgs is just another version of Barney Fife or Ralph Furley. All the characters he played throughout his career, if you notice, they all had kind of the same similarities. Bubbly, lovable goofball,
Well, and Don Knotts, I just remember as a 10-year-old kid watching this, and being familiar with him from the Andy Griffith Show.
Sure.
For me, it was a natural thing, to watch him in this. It was familiar territory for me.
Hey, Gar,
and I think it was, during the time, when spooky was kind of new to me.
Sure, yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's more of this kind of discovery kind of, reaction that was happening to me as a kid.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, there's this whole, thing, about this. But it was just, the element of him and his style of comedy,
Yeah.
which is very different from other people's slapstick.
Sure.
His slapstick was Don Knotts' slapstick, and it was so funny, that by the end of the movie, you had kind of a happy feeling, which is very different for stuff that's spooky stuff.
Well, Luther Higgs is kind of like the underdog. All through the movie, he goes through this kind of these ups and downs of, he's feeling all good because his story gets in the paper, and then, everybody's he's feeling like a hot shot, and then they're trying to prove that he's lying, and he looks like an idiot, and he loses his job and all this. But by the end of the movie, he gets the girl that nobody ever thought he'd get. He marries her. He is thought much more by the end of the movie as a hero. And he's a guy that we're all rooting for. By the end of the movie, you're kind of glad that everything ends up going his way.
Well, I discovered another thing.
Yeah.
When in preparing, was Joan Staley, his female co-star, the female lead, I believe. Yeah. She, and this is very unusual for the time, and that's the reason why I'm pointing it out.
Sure.
She had appeared in Playboy magazine, and back in the 1950s, all the way into the 1960s, Playboy was, it was considered pornography. Even though if we look at it today, it's so milquetoast,
and yet
for pornography.
Yeah.
But back in those days, Playboy was considered pornography.
And yet, Gar,
and to have someone that appeared in pornography, and then to go on to be the female lead in a major
motion
production movie, it was very unusual for the time.
And yet, Gar, people may have no idea what we're talking about, but also in the 1960s and 70s with Playboy, a thing that was very big at the time is they had all those Playboy clubs, and many of the so-called Hollywood elites, like we mentioned in past episodes, Bill Cosby was one, for example, was showing up at the Playboy clubs, and that was a big thing, the fact that he showed up and some of these other Hollywood elites. But that was a thing back in the day, and they eventually, one by one, closed down all those Playboy clubs. They don't even, to the point that they don't even exist. But now, Gar, in talking about the Ghost and Mr. Chicken, we of course mentioned Don Knotts, who is TV royalty at this point in time. But did you notice somebody else that was on a classic TV show, movie, was in the film?
Oh God! I mean, it's just like everybody that was in this movie was in like everything else that was going on TV at the same time. Bewitched,
Dick Sargent. Yeah.
Well, Dick Sargent. There's just, but literally everybody that appears in The Ghost and Mr. Chicken were regulars on virtually every TV show that was going on at the same time.
And see, that's another thing they kind of used to do when they make some of these movies. They'd be like, okay, well, let's get some people from TV. That way, people will recognize, that's so and so. That's this Don Knotts. He's Barney Fife and all this, and that would help get people into see some of these movies.
Well, it's to me, seeing all of those faces, they're all so familiar.
Yeah.
But a younger generation would look at all those faces and they would just they would not. It would be totally looked at out of context.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because a current generation or a younger generation would not be familiar with these actors and actresses, that were in this, and it wouldn't have the same kind of effect. I think that Don Knotts' style of comedy is timeless, and it still would translate to today because slapstick is funny.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of elements about this movie that at that time that was seen by everybody at that time. It's a really different. It's seen through completely different eyes.
And besides Don Knotts being the star of the film, other thing we should mention about the movie is a big kind of theme that runs through the entire movie. The movie and the story itself is centered around this alleged haunted mansion in the nearby town. And there's supposedly some guy killed his wife, and then he turned the gun on himself and killed himself, and all this. And there's these rumors, and everybody's like, "Oh, don't go near that house. That place is haunted." I don't know about you, Gar, but I know in United States of America, at least, we always hear these small towns having haunted. I remember when I was a kid, there was this one like kind of brick house, like it was a mansion too, and it just it looked haunted. It looked like a crazy haunted house, and there are all these rumors about like don't go near that house, and like Halloween time people wouldn't go near. There's probably ghosts and all these crazy rumors, and I'm sure this has taken place in other parts of town. But I remember as a kid, we would not go near this house just because we thought it was haunted.
Well, that experience that you just described, is a timeless experience.
Yeah.
And I think all generations of kids
go through that,
have those kind of things.
Yeah.
I remember there was a drainage wash when I was a kid, and it was behind the elementary school that I used to go to, and it was big enough to actually walk into. It was all cement and everything. And when you went to the opening of that wash and you yelled in there, it echoed so eerily. And as kids, we made up all kinds of stories about the monster that lived inside that wash.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like kids nowadays, I guarantee you they have their own version of the same thing. I don't think that will ever stop happening with kids.
No, yeah.
And that's the wonderful thing about being kids.
Yeah, and in fact, that's the thing that kind of runs through the movie. When it gets to the point of the movie where they decide that they're going to take Luther Haggs to court and prove that his article was, about the house being haunted was a lie and everything. They're trying to, prove him to be a liar and a sham and all this. I mean, everybody's wanting to believe it, but at this point he's trying to believe, and he really kind of believes that the house is haunted and that he's seen all these things. He's like, oh, sure, people are going to go and they'll see it's haunted too. But it's one of those things like, they had the secret passages in the house, but when everybody else went, they couldn't find it, and so that's part of the movie. It's kind of like, we know what he's saying is true, but nobody else realizes it yet.
Well, I just, for me, I just loved the element of the creepy. When we always do any episode of the Time Machine on anything horror, creepy is a big part of my vocabulary.
Sure, yeah.
And this one's a comedy horror, but it still has the element of creepy. But it has the element of creepy that I just absolutely love.
Yeah.
I love creepy, but I didn't know it for a long time that there is a degree of creepy that can go beyond what I like and into an area that I really don't care for. Yeah. I just like the safe zone of creepy. You know what I mean? Kind of. Kind of like when you get hot sauce at a fast food place. It's not hot at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They call it hot sauce, but it's not hot at all.
Yeah.
Well, that's my degree of creepy.
In fact,
it's hot sauce, but it's not hot at all.
In fact,
here's an example.
Sure.
When I was a kid, and we used to go out for Halloween.
Yeah.
There was a time when, my friends and I had come up with an idea that for Halloween, just to kind of seal off our celebration of Halloween, we were going to walk through a cemetery.
Yeah.
And that is creepy. Now, I lived in West Covina, and the closest cemetery was on Grand Avenue in Covina, in the city of Covina. And we went to that cemetery, and we were walking through it. And it was a normal cemetery where all the headstones were like just flat on the ground, the way you always see it now. But we didn't know this. Way back in the back of the cemetery was the old section. And oh my gosh, it was so creepy. There were some graves that dated back to the 1800s in that cemetery. And we all discovered this, by just going through there. And our whole time there, we were not disrespectful. We were not doing it in a disrespectful way. We had actually turned it into a discovery.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Where we now we discovered there's this whole section of this cemetery that dates back to the 1800s. And man, was that section creepy.
I bet,
and then there were some other friends of ours that heard that we were doing that, and then they yelled at us and they scared the crap out of us, and we took off running.
Wow.
And we left the cemetery. We got totally freaked out.
I love that.
But that's creepy to me, and that's my thing. It's like it's not like super scary. It's kind of tame and everything, but it's still kind of creepy. Makes your skin crawl.
Yeah, and of course, we should let people know that The Ghost and Mr. Chicken was released on January 20th, 1966 by Universal Pictures. And of course, Don Knotts played the role of Luther Higgs, who dreams of becoming a reporter. He, although he is just a typesetter at the local newspaper. He's that guy that works at the newspaper with the dream of becoming a reporter, and everybody he's just the guy who kind of walks. Hi Luther. They think he's never going to go anywhere in life. And so, even as a movie is opening up, Gar, you remember the part where kind of a story kind of gets kicked off with this crazy kind of lady who lives next door to the mansion. Whoa, Luther, you need to come here. There's a man got banged on the head. He was murdered here. He just murdered here. You got to come take pictures. Takes pictures, tells everyone that this guy was killed at the mansion. Come to find out, he was just a drunk that got knocked out. And then he's telling everybody, this guy is dead. And they're, another crazy Luther story.
Well, that was the same town drunk that played the town drunk in the Andy Griffith Show.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
See, remember we were talking about it earlier in this episode. There is so many correlations between this movie and the Andy Griffith Show, and there is a classic example how not only was he in the Andy Griffith, but he was playing the same part.
Sure.
He used to play in the Andy Griffith Show, but just now in this movie.
Yeah, and of course,
so it was just, and there's so many of those correlations.
Yeah, and of course, Adriana said the movie combines Don Knotts' trademark nervous energy and physical comedy, as we've talked a little bit about. Don Knotts, interestingly enough, Gar himself had a fear of horror films himself, but he was still able to deliver his comedy and lines in making for a very memorable performance that mixed both fear and humor.
Well, I think that, you just touched on it. The best way to describe his style of that was a nervous, that the nervousness to what he added to his slapstick.
Yeah.
And just made it his own. That nervousness was his stamp.
Yeah. In fact, another trademark he had that we've talked a little bit about is no matter if you're talking about Barney Fife or Ralph Furley or any of these other classic movies he made during his career, one thing they all kind of feature in all these things is that classic kind of nervous eye rolling. That almost became his trademark in anything he ever did.
Yes, it was his stamp.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And but it was so good.
Yeah.
It was so it made everything he did so natural.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I was reading that the screenplay was written by this guy James B. Allardyce, known at the time for writing for many TV shows, one of which was The Twilight Zone and also The Outer Limits.
The same, all of these actors were the same actors that you saw in all these movies. You would see them in, regular comedies and stuff like Bewitched and
well, this was a guy.
But you would also see them in stuff like Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and stuff, because all this stuff was going on during the same time.
Well, Gar, this was the guy that wrote the screenplay, the writer. But that's my point is, they found the screenwriter, from some guy that wrote scripts for other TV shows,
Yes.
Yeah. And it says, since the release of The Ghost of Mr. Chicken, it has become a movie that people traditionally watch around Halloween time every year.
That's when I discovered it.
Yeah.
That is when it was airing on TV, and I had discovered it. It was like part of the Halloween theme, and there were we did an episode on Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But for a long stretch during the 60s, every Halloween they showed on Halloween, before you would go out trick or treating, they would show Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein on TV, and it just kind of became this tradition when I was a kid. That I would watch that, and then I would put on my costume, and then I would go out trick or treating.
Sure.
And so when they stopped, they stopped airing it. I was so bummed out. And but Mr. The Ghost of Mr. Chicken was just like that.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, they were showing The Ghost of Mr. Chicken during the Halloween stretch too, and eventually that kind of stopped. And I guarantee you, there were people that were just as disappointed, as myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When they stopped doing it as a tradition.
Gar, and let's talk now about the funny title of the movie, because I came across this, which I think a lot of people kind of get a kick out of this. It said that the word chicken in the movie's title refers to Don Knotts' character Luther Haig's fearful nature, because chicken is slang for coward, but by the movie's end, Luther Haig proves his bravery and that he's not such a coward after all.
Well, he gets his redemption.
Yeah, that's a great word, I mean? Redemption, yeah.
It's really, it's his actual, and of course, if they didn't end it that way, it's just, I don't think anybody would have liked the movie. Yeah. But that's part of the reason, the warmth and, what everybody really enjoys is because, he was unjustly ganged up on by the people in that town. He was ganged up on by society.
And how many people?
When you are being ganged up on by other people, it can be a very disconcerting feeling. It can be really, it can really put a person out of sorts.
And how many people?
And so to watch him go through something like that, and of course, the good people have empathy for him.
Yeah.
Going through that, and so then when they end the movie with him getting his redemption, it just sets everything right. You know what I mean?
Gar,
it's how we would like to picture how life really should be.
Yeah, Gar, that's why I do this show with you. I mean, in one word, you've been able to sum up what this whole movie is about: redemption. And like you're saying, probably 50% of the people watching this movie, I mean, you got a certain percentage of people that probably during their lifetime were the bully, picked on other people. And then you got the other 50% of the audience who kind of can relate to what Luther Higgs is going through. Like, oh yeah, I went through a similar experience in my life where I used to get picked on. I kind of can understand what that poor guy is going through. So that's another reason the film was so successful.
Well, yes, it's all of those kind of disconcerting storylines of the experiences that we go through in life, and unfortunately, in life, there is no script, and there is no control. So things just wind up going the way that they're going to go, whether we like it or not. But in movies, we can actually contour how everything goes, and by how we write the script, and we can control all of that stuff. And then, so of course, what we want as a moviegoer to especially in the 1960s, because everything was viewed very differently back in those days. And we back in those days, the movie-going public wanted to be able to see an ending in a movie that made them feel that everything was all right.
Yeah, in fact, in fact, like I said, he is not your typical Hollywood star with the, he did not have a drop dead, just, it's not a heartthrob, so to speak, but yet, by the end of the movie ends the way we basically, they wrapped it up with a nice little bow. The kind of underdog throughout the whole movie, he ends up meeting, marrying the girl that he's been kind of crazy about for years, and nobody, including himself, ever thought he stood a chance of would ever end up with her. And it's almost kind of like same thing watching our favorite classic TV. I mean, I remember so many episodes like of the Brady Bunch watching. You get 30 minutes of we're going to give you a life lesson, and by the end of the episode, we're going to wrap it up with a nice bow. Like I remember so many times, like watching the Brady Bunch, like I said, where you get an episode like, "Well, son, as long as you know what you did was wrong, I think that's punishment enough."
Unfortunately, that that is the way that we view it, and how it should be, and everything like that. But unfortunately, in real life, we have some parents that didn't parent that way. And it wasn't as rosy as that picture.
See, again, that's why people tune into stuff like that, because maybe it takes them away from whatever problems they did have in their real life. You could tune into something like that for 30 minutes, be like,
I have to admit that I had a childhood that was not a very happy childhood. Wow. And watching stuff like that, was an escape. When you're living in a situation that is, not a happy situation. Sometimes, watching these kind of things or reading certain types of books. I remember at the same time, I used to be addicted to Hardy Boys books.
Oh, wow.
And I had just this really large collection of Hardy Boys books.
Okay.
I just loved them back in those days. But as an adult, I look back now, and those Hardy Boys books were my escape.
Yeah, and we all need
from what was happening in my life that was not very enjoyable.
We all need those escapes.
So that it was very helpful at that time to be able to have those kind of escapes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And funny, Gar, I got to ask you this because, being a musician yourself that puts on great live performances for people to come check out. I mean, how many times I'm sure, you put on one of your Appetite for Destruction shows, somebody's maybe had the worst day of their life, but they come to your concert and just kind of, for an hour and a half, you make them forget about their problems.
Well, that element that you just brought up right there is, I think it's the element that gives me, the best feeling.
Yeah.
Simply because, and I'm being 100% honest about that. And it doesn't matter if I'm doing the Time Machine or if I'm doing Appetite for Destruction or if I'm doing any of the things that I do as entertainment on my Facebook page or anything like that. If I am giving that to someone, there is no price tag that you can put on something like that. There's no monetary value that you can put on that. It is a residual effect of what I do.
Yeah.
That if I'm bringing that to somebody else, bringing some kind of joy and some kind of escape for someone else, or some kind of reminisce to something that just gives them really warm memories, any kind of enjoyment, then I will never be able to describe how wonderful that makes me feel.
Yeah, because
and it has nothing to do with making money.
No.
And it has nothing to do with anything. It has nothing to do with anything other than what I want to accomplish in my life. Which is I just want to accomplish good.
Yeah, in my life. Like I share
I want to try to be the best person that I can be. And I'm far from it. I have my flaws that I'm still working on today, and I just want to be a good person.
Well, you're a good person, Gar.
If I'm doing that to other people, and I'm giving that to other people, those are the things that tell me that I am doing something good.
Yeah, Gar, you are a good person, but we all have our flaws. But I think what really makes for a good person, somebody that's able to recognize the fact that they have any flaws at all. Because let's be honest, unless you're God, nobody is perfect here. But as I shared with you and our listeners at the top of today's episode, the last episode we did on Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving, we posted that, and within one day it went to 1.k number of views, and that is huge. We've had other episodes that done that, not every single episode though, but they're I guess standout episodes as you would say. And when I seen that, I was checking every hour of the day, and okay, it's gone up another 100, and all through the day I'm like, okay, you know what? Not only was that something that me and Gar enjoyed talking about, but we struck a nerve. That was a great idea, Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving. That obviously means something to a lot of people,
Yes, and we, that's what I'm saying. If I'm bringing that to anybody in their life or whatever, it's just that signification to me that I'm actually successfully accomplishing what I want to, what I want to be.
Yeah.
And what I want to be to other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think we've accomplished that with what we're doing here, and we continue to do so because we've never had one episode where we got just one or two views. People are constantly tuning in, and then even years later, you find out some of the past episodes just all of a sudden go a crazy viral number. In fact, talking about Don Knotts, I don't have a number in front of me, but I can tell you. When we first did our episode on the incredible Mr. Olympic a couple years back, it got a decent number of views, but not a huge number. But I was just came across it the other day, and it's gone into the stratosphere now a few years later. So, this stuff builds over a course of time,
Yes. Hey, we still have enough time. I want to bring up something.
Go ahead, Gar.
That, it's about Don Knotts. but a lot of people really don't really talk that much about, and I don't want anybody to take this and because this can be, there can be the male chauvinist interpretation of what I'm bringing up.
Sure.
But it really does. It's more of an appreciation.
Okay.
During Don Knotts, younger years, like during the time when he was like really popular on the Andy Griffith Show, and then when he wound up going into movies, the women that he was dating during that time was incredible. I mean, this guy was dating some of the most beautiful women you could ever imagine.
Oh, yeah. I get what you're saying. And
that is just so out of context because, when you look at pictures of a male with a woman of that kind of beauty, it's usually some major male lead guy, a Robert Redford or, that kind of
thing.
Gar, John Knotts was really never known as that, but he was dating some of the most... I looked at his ex-wife that he had back in the 1970s all the way up into the 80s. My God, that woman was insanely beautiful.
Yeah, Gar, I'm glad you brought that up because, we kind of made that point earlier in the episode that Don Knotts is not the typical Robert Redford heartthrob. Yet, why do you think a guy like that was able to get that high caliber of a woman? A couple of things. Maybe because you'd be amazed that anytime you hear people talking about dating or who they go out with, a lot of times people are attracted to somebody just based on they have a great sense of humor. So I can see a lot of these women. Oh, okay, he's not a Hollywood heartthrob, but he's a he was on TV. He was in the movies. He's a funny guy. Or when I'm around him, he always makes me laugh. So that's how a guy like this is able to get that caliber of woman because they're famous themselves to begin with, or he's a real funny guy. He always makes me laugh.
Well, some people will say, I guess this is glass half empty, glass half full, but some people will say that, he was able to get these women because he had all this money.
Maybe.
And there's a truth to that.
Yeah, sure.
But then there will be other people that will say that the women were attracted to them because of his achievements.
Yeah, it could be. Could be a little bit of all that, yeah. I don't doubt it.
It could be one, it could be the other, or it could be a little bit of both.
I kind of think a little bit of both.
But I agree. I think it's a little bit of both. It's the fact because in order, and there's the chauvinist aspect of what I'm saying, and I don't mean it in that way.
No.
But back in those days, to be able to date a woman like that, you had to have a lot of money.
And again,
you had to be able to afford to date a woman like that.
I mean, I dare say, Gar, that's the thing even in the world today. A lot of times you hear people, especially among the elite Hollywood rich, they tell you, well, I'm going with that person because they're a movie star too, or they got money. A lot of times you'll hear other up-and-coming Hollywood people hook up with rich established celebrities that are already famous, simply the fact because they're who they are or because they do have money. It's just kind of if we want to admit it or not, it's a fact of life. But talking a little more about Don Knotts and his success in Hollywood and on TV, Gar, before we wrap up today's episode, that's part of the reason a guy like Don Knotts was able to be successful in Hollywood. I mean, he didn't have the standard Hollywood. He wasn't the standard Hollywood good-looking heartthrob, as we said. And so to make it in Hollywood, you gotta have something. And he had his physical comedy. He had his comedy chops. And in fact, because he wasn't a heartthrob, sometimes that played a role in the part he was playing. They kind of the fact that he was like, if you Ralph Furley being a great example of that. I remember first episode he was ever on, he came on meeting everybody in the Regal Beagle, the local pub, for the first time, and he's wearing this loud loud colors, and it just, everybody was looking, you know what I mean? But it made a statement.
Yeah. When the first time you saw him as Mr. Furley,
yeah,
before he even uttered a word, he would start chuckling.
Yeah, and that's
just from the way he looked.
Yeah, that's the point.
Not even meaning that he looked bad,
and not even
was just the choice of attire.
And not only
at the time,
not only that,
very comedic.
Let's talk about the attire. But you make the great point. Before he even utters a word, he's got these flashy kind of sunglasses, like he thinks he's Mr. Hollywood, and the character of Ralph Furley, unlike Barney Fife, he just oozes this kind of self-confidence when maybe he shouldn't. The way he talks and presents himself, he thinks that Ralph Furley is this real ladies' man, and all the chicks want to be with him. He just kind of oozes that kind of personality, that self-confident guy that maybe really shouldn't be so self-confident.
Well, he broke the mold.
Yeah.
That's the best way to put it, because 90% of the men out there that would have his looks would not have had that kind of confidence, would not have had that kind of drive to develop his comedic abilities and all of that stuff.
In fact,
you know what I mean?
In fact,
you have to hand it to him.
Yeah.
Because society dictated that if you looked the way that Don Knotts looked, you were not going to be as successful as the beautiful people in society.
Yeah.
And that was the way it was back then. That was the norm.
Yeah, in fact,
and he broke that mold. He didn't just step out of that mold. He broke it.
In fact, even talk a little more about Mr. Furley. If you remember his apartment, all the furniture was real loud and obnoxious, and everybody kind of making comments. In fact, I remember one episode where Mr. Furley's supposed to be going away, and Janet's supposed to feed his turtle. Jack said, "Oh, Mr. Furley, you don't want absent-minded Janet to feed your fish. I'll do it for you," because he doesn't want the girl that he's on a date with to know that he lives with two other girls and this and that. So he's pretending like Mr. Furley's apartment is his own. Mr. Furley comes back early and he lies about the girls with, I'm going to fix you up with her, Mr. Furley, and this and that. And she's supposed to be an interior decorator, and she's commenting about just she's like, oh, this place, I've never seen anything like it. And again, he doesn't have a clue, but she's kind of insulting the way the place looks. He's like, oh, really? You've seen nothing like it? And he said, and then she says some comment about something about the bathroom, or are we in it? And he has no clue that she's insulting his furniture.
Comedy.
Yeah, but and to wrap up today's episode, Gar, I think we really got to. Another thing is, like I said at the top of today's episode, when this movie came out, he had just left the Andy Griffith Show, and this kind of launched his movie career, and because it was so successful. I mean, and let's talk about when he left the Andy Griffith Show. That was a very big deal because that's all he had been known for at that time. And I think at that point he was typecast. Everybody thought of him only as a lovable, goofy Barney Fife. And so luckily he was successful and able to launch his movie career because of this film. But let's be honest, when he left the Andy Griffith Show, I guess they thought they'd be able to go on because you still had Andy Griffith. He was a star of the show. But the thing that they quickly found out, it was Andy and Barney together that made the show. It was not the same show when Don Knotts left, and that's why they only lasted a few more seasons.
If your point was not valid, the show would have lasted a lot longer.
Yeah.
But it actually wound up, taking a major dive.
Yeah.
When Don Knotts wound up leaving, and he played a major part. But then also, what does that tell Don Knotts? You know what I mean?
He got some star power.
He was well aware of the effect of him leaving that show. So that I'm sure that had to be a major confidence booster to him to leave the show and to see what kind of impact that he had by leaving the show.
Yeah, because, I think initially they thought, we could just get some other bumbling idiot to play that, take his place. But it just was not the same. The two of them together. In fact, years later when Andy Griffith launched, like in the 80s, another TV show, Matlock, which was way different than Andy. From time to time, he would have Don Knotts, appear in Matlock with him as a guest star. Or from time to time, they would do like movies and TV movies and stuff together. So they always kept, they always remained as friends, for the rest of their lives.
Well, yeah, but also, it's I think that's why I use the term catching lightning in a bottle. Because Don Knotts, that's exactly what Don Knotts did. He captured lightning in a bottle. In the most unlikeliest place. Yeah, he captured it.
And we should end on this because I guess like a lot of successful people, he knew his limitations. He knew what he was good at. What I mean, like in all his movies, he played a similar type of character. They weren't exactly the same, but kind of this loser underdog type. And he'd always kind of persevere, and end up a hero or something like that. Or all through the movie, we're rooting for him. In these different movies he did, and he could have I think very much like Adam West with Batman. At some point in his career, he's like, you know what? I have no problem being the bumbling idiot. I will embrace that. Very much like Adam West was typecast as Batman, but for the rest of his life, he embraced that. He was able to make a living, go and doing these conventions. I mean, even like we did recently an episode on Sonny and Cher. Sonny was a bumbling idiot, but you know what? He made it work for him.
Well, I think the element that Don Knotts brought to that bumbling idiot element was he was endearing.
Yeah, endearing. That's another good word.
You fell in love with his character.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You fell in love with his character as Barney Fife. Yeah. But then when he goes to Ghost and Mr. Chicken, the style of his nervous. That quirkiness, that nervous quirkiness. It was a residual effect of it in the way he presented it. It just naturally was endearing. Everybody loved him. You know what I mean? He just kind of, it's a warm spot in your heart.
Yeah,
and that's that part of this whole thing that made him such an icon.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Such an icon is he had this ability to not only do the comedy but to make it endearing.
Yeah, he really did. And sadly he's gone, but we will never forget Don Knotts. I mean, just from Barney Fife to Ralph Furley to Luther Higgs and all these characters in between. I mean, I urge people, like, if you want to see more, if you want to see what Don Knotts is capable of, besides just, checking him out on Three's Company and the Andy Griffith Show, go and check out stuff like The Incredible Mr. Limpet, The Ghost of Mr. Chicken, The Reluctant Astronaut, The Shakiest Gun in the West. I'm sure you can find a lot of this stuff on YouTube. You go to Amazon. I bought a lot of these movies on Amazon, so you can still get these movies if you want to check them out.
Yes, all of his style of comedy will still make you laugh.
Yeah, and from time to time you can tune on like a late movie, like around midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes on your cable TV, and you can come across these. Yeah, because they're classics.
Well, I guarantee you, the last thing Don Knotts was ever crossing his mind that even after he's passed away, that people like us would be still continuing on talking about him and giving him credit for his achievements.
Yeah, and
this many years after he has passed.
Yeah, and Don Knotts, in all our history of doing this little show, Gar, I think he's one of the people that we've talked the most about, because we did today's episode. We've also did the one, as I said, on the incredible Mr. Olympic from a couple of years back. We, of course, did an episode on Three's Company, and so he's got quite a great legacy, I think, at this point.
Well, I will continue watching his stuff for many years to come.
Yeah. Well, Gar.
And I invite anybody else that doesn't know anything about him, at least check it out.
Well, you know what, Gar?
Because I don't know anyone that doesn't like to laugh.
Yeah, Gar, as you and I like to say in reference to this show, as we often do in every episode, if you want to learn more about Don Knotts, then do the research.
And it's really, I have to admit, doing the research for this show is fun.
Yeah, because
you know what I mean?
I always learn.
I really have to admit, doing the research for this show is fun.
Yeah, it really is. And in closing, Gar, I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. A couple weeks back, Christmas is, believe it or not, as we do this, like 17 days away, right around the corner. So in regards to that, next time Gar and I get together, we're going to be talking about the classic Christmas movie, Miracle on 34th Street. And we've already brought this up in the past, but the Miracle on 34th Street is kind of what inspired the Macy's Day Parade to launch. And so we'll get into all that, but I look forward to talking about that in 2 weeks from now, Gar.
Absolutely. Virtually everything that we have on the docket is going to be amazing. And I hope the people that are listeners really enjoy what we have coming up.
Yeah, but I can't wait for them to hear it, but we'll have to wait a few more episodes, and we'll share that in the new year. So until then, we have like 1 or 2 more episodes for the year. Take care, Gar. I'll be talking to you again real soon.
Merry Christmas to you, and Merry Christmas to everyone else out there, and be safe.
And be good to each other, right?
Be good to each other, and don't drink. Have fun, but don't drink too much.
Exactly. Good thoughts. Bye, Gar.
Bye.